Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Monday, April 10th, 2023. An emotional Kentucky Governor, Andy Beshear, says a close friend is one of the 4 people killed in a mass shooting at a bank in Louisville by a gunman who was a former employee. As President Joe Biden again calls for additional gun control measures, tweeting, "When will Republicans in Congress act to protect our communities?" What's next after a Texas judge's ruling to overturn the FDA's approval of an abortion pill? We'll hear from 2 U.S. House Republicans with different views on how the FDA should respond, and also the White House plan from the director of the White House Gender Policy Council. Pentagon says it's working to assess the potential damage from the leak and public posting of intelligence documents that cover everything from Ukraine's war battle plans to U.S. spying on adversaries and some allies. We'll get the latest from National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby. President Biden and First Lady Jill Biden hosting children and parents for the annual Easter egg roll on the White House lawn. Again, the theme this year is education. And it's the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement that ended decades of fighting in Northern Ireland between nationalists and unionists. We'll hear from former President Bill Clinton on this day 25 years ago. The story from the Associated Press, a 23-year-old used a rifle to kill 4 people, including a close friend of the governor, Monday at the Louisville bank where he was an employee, authorities said. The shooting, the 15th mass killing in the country this year, comes just 2 weeks after a former student killed 3 children and 3 adults at a Christian elementary school in Nashville, Tennessee, about 160 miles to the south. That state's governor and his wife also had friends killed in that shooting. Police in Louisville arrived as gunshots were still being fired inside Old National Bank and exchanged fire with the shooter, who died, Louisville Metro Police Department Deputy Chief Paul Humphrey said at a news conference. He said it wasn't clear whether the shooter killed himself or was shot by officers. Also, at least 8 people injured, including 2 police officers. Kentucky's Governor Andy Beshear speaking at a news conference in Louisville after the shooting.
I have a very close friend that didn't make it today. And I have another close friend who didn't either, and one who's at the hospital that I hope is going to make it through. So when we talk about praying, I hope people will. For those that we are hoping can make it through the surgeries that they're going through, and then we've got to do what we have done these last 3 years after everything. We've got to wrap our arms around these families. And to everybody who needs it, don't be afraid to get some help. Our bodies and our minds are not meant to go through these types of tragedies. And so I hope that all the brave officers that stepped into the line of fire, that are worried about one of their fellow officers, will reach out for help when they need it. I hope every one of those bank employees and folks in that building, one that I know well, and my AG campaign was out of that building. I know virtually everyone in it. That's my bank. I hope that they will all reach out and get the help that they need. There are a lot of people that are hurting today. And if we have a place to focus our energy, I hope it is to surround them with the love and the compassion that we have been so good at showing one another. I want people to know that while today is a horrific act, I do believe that this is a safe community with officers doing their very best each and every day, and that's what we saw here. Yes, I know that there are steps that the police department is taking to do things better after a recent report, but we certainly saw, I think, the very best from them today, and I want to thank them and all our other law enforcement officers for responding and doing their best to try to save some of my friends and many others.
Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear, Democrat, at a news conference in Louisville today. The Louisville police chief identifying the victims: Tommy Elliott, 63 years old, Jim Tutt, 64, Josh Barrick, 40, and Juliana Farmer, 57. Also identifying the shooter, Connor Sturgeon, who was killed during the shooting. The 2 U.S. senators from Kentucky, both Republicans, tweeting their reactions. This from Mitch McConnell. Elaine and I are devastated by the news coming out of Louisville this morning. Thank you to LMPD and our first responders for your bravery at the scene. We send our prayers to the victims, their families, and the city of Louisville as we await more information. And from Senator Rand Paul, Kelly and I are praying For everyone involved in the deadly shooting in downtown Louisville this morning, our hearts break for the families of those lost. A tweet from President Joe Biden. Once again, our nation mourns after a senseless act of gun violence. Jill and I pray for the lives lost and impacted by today's shooting. Too many Americans are paying for the price of inaction with their lives. When will Republicans in Congress act to protect our communities? More on that from the White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre during her daily briefing.
Today, we saw another senseless act of gun violence, killed at least 4 Americans and injured at least 8 others, this time in Louisville, Kentucky. The President and the First Lady are praying for those killed and injured in the tragic shooting in Louisville and for the survivors who will carry the trauma for the rest of their lives. They are grateful for the LMPD officers who quickly and courageously stepped into the line of fire to save others. Once again, today, the President has called on Republicans in Congress to work together with Democrats to take action, to ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines, to require safe storage of firearms, to require background checks for all gun sales, to eliminate gun manufacturers' immunity from liability. These are common sense actions we can ask for and should be getting right now. And it's what Americans want. We know that majority of the American people support this. Instead, we've watched Republican official after Republican official after Republican official double down on dangerous bills that make our schools, that makes our places of worship, that makes our communities less safe, while too many Americans are paying with their lives. So again, we need to act, and we need Republicans to show some courage, Republicans in Congress.
The White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre at the start of her briefing with reporters in the White House briefing room today. This from thehill.com. House Democrats are moving to protect access to abortion pills after a federal judge in Texas blocked the Food and Drug Administration's approval of mifepristone, a drug that can be used for abortions and to manage early miscarriages. Pat Ryan, Democrat from New York, and Lizzie Fletcher, Democrat from Texas, reintroduced the Protecting Reproductive Freedom Act on Monday, which would reaffirm the FDA's approval authority for abortion medication over state laws. It would also protect doctors' ability to provide abortion medication through telehealth. The judge sided with an anti-abortion group that had argued that the FDA improperly rushed its approval process, leading to an unsafe drug regimen landing on the market. Mifepristone was first approved in the year 2000. That reporting from The Hill. Judge in Washington state on Friday making the opposite ruling on this abortion pill, possibly meaning it will go all the way to the Supreme Court to decide. FDA is appealing the Texas ruling, but some House Democrats suggesting the FDA simply ignore the judge's order. We've got mixed reactions on that from House Republicans. First, Congressman Tony Gonzalez of Texas.
On this ruling, I have 6 children. I'm a prolific pro-lifer, and I think it's important that we protect the sanctity of life. I believe in state rights. Here in Texas, we have a heartbeat bill that was passed, and I think it's important that states dictate their futures, and we have to have the courts uphold these. I mean, it's very dangerous when you have the administration, the Biden administration, coming out and saying they may not uphold a ruling as an appropriator on the House Republican side. I look at it, the House Republicans have the power of the purse. And if the administration wants to not lead this ruling, not live up to this ruling, then we're going to have a problem. And it may become a point where House Republicans on the appropriation side have to defund FDA programs that don't make sense.
Congressman Tony Gonzalez, Republican from Texas, on CNN on Sunday. A different take from Congresswoman Nancy Mace, Republican from South Carolina, on CNN today.
This is an issue that Republicans have been largely on the wrong side of. We have, over the last 9 months, not shown compassion towards women. And this is one of those issues that I've tried to lead on as someone who's pro-life and just have some common sense. In the state of South Carolina, just a few weeks ago, we had some folks in the state legislature that essentially wanted to execute women who had abortions. So we've got some extreme views on this issue, but 90% of America is somewhere in the middle. And I think that 90% would be okay with listening to the FDA rather than a judge who used an old law that was determined unconstitutional by the Supreme Court.
Congresswoman Nancy Mace, Republican from South Carolina, today on CNN. As for what basis the FDA could conceivably not follow the Texas judge's decision, this from an Axios story. Some legal experts say the agency has discretion to chart a path forward and keep some semblance of the status quo. They cite a 1985 Supreme Court ruling that held agency decisions not to take enforcement actions aren't subject to judicial review. And they note there's already an established legal path for revoking a drug approval that involves public hearings and gives the manufacturer a say. Jennifer Klein is director of the White House Gender Policy Council. She was on MSNBC this morning with the Biden administration strategy.
We disagree strenuously with this decision. A court in Texas has taken what is virtually an unprecedented step, maybe literally unprecedented step, to reject FDA's approval of a medication which, as you just said, has been on the market safely and available for women for decades, for over 20 years. So first and foremost, we are fighting this decision in court. And it's important to note that the decision is stayed for 7 days, which means that nothing has changed and that mifepristone, the drug in question, is available as it was before the judge issued this decision on Friday evening. And what we are going to do is, and the Department of Justice has already done, is filed a notice of appeal. We will appeal this case, and we believe that we will win, and this decision, which would effectively ban abortion nationwide, will not stand.
So is this, do you think that the consequence that many were worried about of Roe being overturned, and the question is what's next, and what else do you think the White House can do?
Well, you know, this is exactly what the Supreme Court said should not happen after Dobbs. You know, agree or disagree with the Dobbs decision, which obviously I disagree with. What the Supreme Court said in that case was that states should decide. And what's happened here is that one judge, you know, the plaintiffs in this case, is literally an organization that was formed after Dobbs to bring this case in Amarillo, Texas, where there is only one judge, so they had 100% chance of getting this judge, to do what effectively they've been trying to do for decades, which is ban abortion nationwide.
Jennifer Klein, director of the White House Gender Policy Council, today on MSNBC. More than 200 pharmaceutical company executives, including Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla, have signed a letter supporting the FDA's authority to regulate drugs, saying the Texas judge's decision on the abortion pill ignores decades of scientific evidence and legal precedent and will set a precedent for diminishing the FDA's authority over drug approvals, which would create uncertainty for the entire industry. This is Washington Today. Congressman Jim Jordan, Republican from Ohio, chair of the subcommittee on the weaponization of the federal government, has subpoenaed former FBI Director Christopher Wray over a memo, which has since been withdrawn by the FBI, that considered how to gain information about white supremacists' interaction with local Catholic churches. TheHill.com writes the memo has become the basis for GOP lawmakers accusing the department of developing an anti-Catholic bias in the wake of last year's Supreme Court decision overturning Roe v. Wade that spurred threats at both churches and abortion clinics. Congressman Jordan was on the Clay and Buck radio program today talking about this memo that came out of the Richmond field office.
Richmond field office in the FBI was looking to, treat traditional Catholics as domestic extremists. And we've now been able to look at the memo put together by the folks there in that office, and it's frightening because they were looking to put informants and undercover people inside of parishes, inside of churches, talking to parishioners, talking to folks, exercising their First Amendment freedom of religion rights, and yet the FBI wanted people in there because they thought that people were, they use the term radical traditional Catholic. So it is truly scary what was going on there. And it's just part of this broader pattern where we see the FTC asking a private company, who are the who were the journalists you're talking to, naming four of those journalists personally. Two of them testify in front of our committee. And while they're testifying, Democrats, members of Congress ask them who their sources are. And while they're asking one of those witnesses who his sources are, the IRS is knocking on his door to his home. So this is the scary trend we see, and why we formed the committee in this Congress.
Jim, appreciate you coming on. Happy belated Easter. I hope you and your family had a good time as well.
We did.
Did I hear that they may have been trying to recruit priests as informants, the FBI?
They were. When you look at this memo, and we outline it in the stuff we put together and sent to the FBI, but when you look at what they were trying to do, they were trying to develop what they call tripwires. People within the church, within that parish, within the church leaders they talk about, who could be possible sources, to alert them to radical traditional Catholics is the term they use. Now, if that is not a direct attack on the first right mentioned in the First Amendment, I do not know what is. And so that we found this and how this is the key thing too, Clambud. How did this get by the general counsel in the Richmond field office? How did this get by the people who were supposed to sign off on approving this memorandum, approving this action? And understand, this got sent to other field offices around the country. Now, they stopped it, thank goodness. But the fact that it went that far is, I think, what really concerns us and should concern every American who cares about the Constitution.
Congressman Jim Jordan, Republican from Ohio, chair of the subcommittee on the weaponization of the federal government, also chair of the full Judiciary Committee, today on the Clay and Buck radio program. Judiciary Committee announcing that 1 week from today, Monday, April 17th, they'll be holding a hearing in New York City titled "The Victims of Violent Crime in Manhattan." The committee describes the hearing as examining how Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg's pro-crime, anti-victim policies have led to an increase in violent crime and a dangerous community for New York City residents. Alvin Bragg is that DA who last week led the effort to indict former President Donald Trump. Witnesses for that hearing of the Judiciary Committee on Crime not announced yet. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky telling CNN that Ukraine has changed some of its military plans after the leak of U.S. and NATO intelligence documents posted on social media. CNN reports that some of the documents expose the extent of U.S. eavesdropping on key allies, including South Korea, Israel, and Ukraine. Others revealed the degree to which the U.S. has penetrated the Russian Ministry of Defense and the Russian mercenary organization Wagner Group, largely through intercepted communications and human sources, which could now be cut off or put in danger. And still others divulged key weaknesses in Ukraine's weaponry, air defenses, and battalion sizes and readiness at a critical point in the war. The Pentagon says it's launched an investigation into the source of the leak and the potential for the damage. More from John Kirby, a spokesperson for the White House National Security Council, today at the White House briefing.
John, I think to start on the classified document leaks, has the president been briefed on this breach, and does the U.S. government at this point have any sense of who was behind it?
The president has been briefed. He was first briefed late last week when we all got word that there were some documents out there, and he has stayed briefed and in contact with national security officials throughout the weekend. So he has been briefed. And as for the source, as you know, the Department of Defense has referred this to the Department of Justice for a criminal investigation, and I certainly would refer you to them, but I'm not aware that they've come to any conclusions at this point about where they're coming from.
And just to follow up on that, at this point, do you believe the leak is contained? Are there more documents out there that have not been released publicly? Is this an ongoing threat?
We don't know. We truly don't.
John Kirby, Strategic Communications Coordinator for the White House National Security Council, with reporters in the White House briefing room. He was also asked about how the leaked intelligence documents might affect U.S. relations with Ukraine, and reports that some of the documents may have been altered before they were made public.
Are there plans for President Biden to speak with President Zelensky over the leak, or is the White House offering any kind of reassurance to Ukrainian officials about the safety of some of their most sensitive information?
U.S. officials have been in touch with relevant allies and partners over the last couple of days at very high levels. I'll leave it at that.
And can you speak to not just the potential leak here, but what appears to be some doctoring of the information? Is this something where it's possible that there may have been a leak, but then a different actor came in, manipulated the information, and posted it online? What's the working theory in terms of the actual altering of this information?
I don't know that we've arrived at a working theory. It does appear that at least in some cases, the information posted online had been altered from what we think would be the original source. But there's just no way I can tell you with any granularity right now how that came to be. We're diving into this as strenuously as we can to try to understand that. And in keeping with your point, I mean, we urge all of you to be very careful about how you report on this story, since we know, at least in some cases, that information was doctored.
John Kirby, spokesperson for the White House National Security Council, in the White House briefing room. This issue of the leaked intelligence documents also coming up at the State Department briefing today with spokesperson Vedant Patel, one reporter asking about U.S. relations with Israel.
Israel has rejected claims raised in the documents that leaders of Mossad had supported nationwide protests against a proposed overhaul of Israel's judiciary. Have you had conversations with your Israeli counterparts on this, and are you concerned more broadly that this leak might affect your relationship with Israel at a time when tensions between Israel and Palestinian groups have sharply increased?
Let me say a couple things to that. First, our partnership with Israel is deep. It is an important partnership that we have with Israel. But broadly, what I will say is that I'm not going to read out private discussions that are taking place between the United States and our allies and partners, beyond just saying that they are happening at the highest levels, and we are working to communicate when we can.
Are you concerned this document leak might have an impact on your relationship?
Again, our commitment to Israel is ironclad. Our commitment to Israel's security is ironclad, and we speak often with our Israeli partners, and you hear this administration writ large talk about the deep relationship that we have with our Israeli partners.
State Department spokesperson Vedant Patel taking questions from reporters in the State Department briefing room. The Wall Street Journal reporting today the State Department on Monday designated as wrongfully detained Evan Gershkovich, a Wall Street Journal reporter who was arrested by Russian security services last month and held on an accusation of espionage that the Journal and the U.S. government vehemently deny. Mr. Gershkovich's case now shifts to a State Department section known as the Office of the Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs, which is focused on negotiating for the release of hostages and other Americans classified as wrongfully detained in foreign countries. Officials said the speed at which the designation was reached was unprecedented, as it involves a lengthy bureaucratic process that typically takes months. The designation seldom comes before the detainee is able to meet with American consular officials from the local embassy, a right Mr. Gershkovich has so far been denied. That reporting from the Wall Street Journal. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Here are some of the live events on Tuesday on C-SPAN Radio. At 11 a.m. Eastern, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen holds a news conference on the IMF World Bank spring meetings in Washington this week. At 1 p.m. Eastern Time, Jen Esterly, director of CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, gives the keynote address at a government summit hosted by the cybersecurity company CrowdStrike. At 2 p.m. Eastern, Social Security Acting Administrator Kilolo Kijakezi speaks at the Urban Institute. Find all C-SPAN radio schedule information at cspan.org.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. Festivities on the White House lawn, children and parents enjoying the annual Easter egg roll. USA Today writes, since President Rutherford B. Hayes first invited children to egg roll on the lawn, the cherished springtime event has become one of the longest-held traditions at the White House. Dating back to 1878, the Easter egg roll came to be shortly after Congress voted to restrict public use of the U.S. Capitol grounds. Washingtonians had traditionally rolled brightly dyed hard-boiled eggs down the lawn with spoons to celebrate Easter Monday, according to the White House Historical Association. This year's events continue the theme of education, started by First Lady Dr. Jill Biden, an educator of more than 30 years in 2022. First Lady Jill Biden and President Joe Biden speaking to the crowd from the White House balcony.
Welcome to the Easter egg roll. As your First Lady and as a teacher, I've seen again and again, learning doesn't only happen in a classroom. There are so many fun opportunities to learn around us every day. And that's why we wanted to celebrate our Easter egg roll. So we turned to the South Lawn into a school community. What brings it to life is all of you. Your laughter, your joy, the art you create, and the memories you take home with you. That is what makes this event so special. So today, we hope you learn, explore, and grow by listening to a story in the reading nook, rolling some eggs, playing with circuit boards, or building robots. And most of all, having fun. Welcome to your house, the White House. Happy Easter. Now, please welcome my husband, our President, Joe Biden.
There you go. Good morning, everyone. I'm Joe Biden, Jill's husband. And welcome to the White House, your house. And special thanks to the Egg Board and the American Egg Farmers, the White House Historical Association, the National Park Service, and all the talented performers, children, and families for being part of such a special White House tradition. It's been going on for a long time. Hope you had a wonderful Easter weekend. Easter is a season of joy, a time of rebirth, renewal, faith, hope, and love. A time to remember that in the beauty of spring, the seeds of new opportunity are planted. And this spring, our future is filled with unlimited possibilities that can multiply and grow because of all the good people here and throughout the country. Ladies and gentlemen, what I see looking across the South Lawn is a country made up of possibilities. Anything's possible in America if we remember who we are and we do it together. So have a wonderful, wonderful time here at the People's House. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Happy Easter.
President Biden and First Lady Jill Biden at the White House with two Easter bunnies on either side of them in new costumes this year. Spokesperson for the First Lady telling CNN after years of using loaned Easter bunny costumes, we are excited to have our own official White House Easter bunny family, thanks to the generous support of the White House Historical Association. White House says about 30,000 people taking part in this year's festivities on the White House lawn, including military and veterans families, caregivers, and survivors, and the tickets for the general public given out through an online lottery. First Lady stopping by some of the activities, including blowing a whistle to start an egg roll and reading a book to children, which included her grandson, Beau, the book Brown Bear, Brown Bear. Early this morning, before the White House Easter egg roll got underway, the President and First Lady were on NBC News' Today Show with Al Roker, who asked the President whether he planned to run for re-election in 2024.
I was just wondering, Mr. President, will you be taking part in the Easter egg rolls after 2024?
Well, I plan on at least 3 or 4 more Easter egg rolls.
At least 3 or 4 more?
Maybe 5.
Maybe 5?
maybe 6.
So
what the hell?
Are you saying that you would be taking part in our upcoming election in 2024?
Well, I'll either be rolling an egg or being the guy who's pushing them out.
Come on, help a brother out. Make some news for me.
Well, I plan on running out, but we're not prepared to announce it yet.
All right.
President Biden with a weatherman, journalist, and personality Al Roker on the NBC Today show this morning. Wall Street today, the Dow up 101, NASDAQ down 3, S&P up 4. World Bank and IMF spring meetings are getting started this week in Washington, D.C. AFP writes the meetings kick off with an ambitious reform and fundraising agenda likely to be overshadowed by concerns over high inflation, rising geopolitical tension, and financial instability. A preview today from Jay Shambaugh, Treasury Undersecretary for International Affairs. He was at the Brookings Institution in Washington. One of the topics he covered, U.S. economic relations with China.
As we look at big challenges, you're going to need the two biggest economies in the world to be able to collaborate and work together on those global challenges. We face a complicated global economic outlook, and there really is a pressing need for the two largest economies, the U.S. and China, to closely communicate on global macro and financial conditions, and as I mentioned, to cooperate on to address global economic challenges. So with respect to U.S.-China relations, as the administration has stated, responsibly managing relations between the world's two largest economies has always been vitally important, and it is in particularly so today. As the leader said in Bali, we have a responsibility to work together on shared challenges, and our approach to China underscores our overall priorities. We want to advance our national security interests while at the same time having a healthy economic relationship with China. Again, as the two largest economies, our ability to cooperate on these global challenges, many of which we've already discussed today, like sovereign debt or MDB evolution, is critical. We remain committed to maintaining open lines of communication with China so that we can prevent miscalculation that could lead to conflict. And I think it's also important for the U.S. to be very clear that we don't seek to decouple from China. We don't seek to limit China's growth in any way. Sometimes we need to take targeted national security-related actions, and we'll always stand up to unfair economic practices. But there's plenty of scope for an economic relationship that benefits both of us.
Jay Shambaugh, Treasury Undersecretary for International Affairs at the Brookings Institution today. After his opening remarks, he took some questions from a moderator and from the audience, and one audience member asked more about his comments dealing with China.
Undersecretary Shambaugh, you spoke very eloquently of the need for the two countries, U.S. and China, to cooperate. You've talked about the lines of communication being open, which is great. But if you look at the actions being taken, the Trump-era tariffs are still in place. There are restrictions on technology exports to China, restrictions on investments in China. The Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act both singled out China as a major country of concern, keeping them out. Can you point to any areas in which there has actually been progress relative to at least the previous administration in terms of the two countries aligning on certain economic issues? And given the political environment in Washington, do you see prospects for doing much more?
So I think what I'd say there is, when you talk about some of the technology restrictions or things like that, I think in some ways I like to make clear to keep those distinct in one way, which is those aren't economic measures aimed at economic competitiveness. They're not things we're doing to benefit the U.S. economically vis-a-vis China. They're situations where, for clear national security objectives, the United States has decided to put in place certain things. And so I think our goal is always to be narrowly targeted, as targeted as appropriate, as narrow as appropriate. I think from the communication side, I think an essential thing there becomes trying to make sure we're able to communicate to our Chinese counterparts why we are doing what we are doing, what we are doing, and that they can communicate back if they see, consequences that are unintended, that we understand that as well. So I think that dialogue can be really important as you are dealing with those national security issues. More broadly on the, do I see huge movements forward? I mean, I think you could say, and I know it's a little unfair because it should happen every year, but, two-way trade reached a record last year, right? It's not that we have decoupled. It's not that we have completely separated ourselves from one another. And as I said, nor are we trying to. And so I think it is important that we are able to work together, that we can talk through issues we have, because we are going to for the foreseeable future, and as far as our intentions, have economies that are very tied to one another in different ways. So whether that's going to mean different changes in different types of policies you noted, I think on the ones that are national security related, I wouldn't anticipate that. That's something that we do them for national security purposes, and that's kind of where we stop.
Jay Shambaugh, Treasury Undersecretary for International Affairs at the Brookings Institution. China's military declaring today it is ready to fight after finishing 3 days of military exercises around Taiwan that simulated sealing off the island. Exercises in apparent response to the Taiwanese president's meeting with U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy in California last week. President Biden leaves on Tuesday for a trip to Belfast, Northern Ireland, and then Dublin, Ireland, to mark the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement. That's the peace deal between the Catholic nationalists who wanted Northern Ireland to be part of Ireland and the Protestant Unionists who wanted to remain part of the United Kingdom. And that agreement ending 3 decades of violence, euphemistically called the Troubles, that had killed well over 3,000 people. Today is the actual 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement. Here is President Bill Clinton at the White House on this day in 1998.
After a 30-year winter of sectarian violence, Northern Ireland today has the promise of a springtime of peace. The agreement that has emerged from the Northern Ireland peace talks opens the way for the people there to build a society based on enduring peace, justice, and equality. The vision and commitment of the participants in the talks has made real the prayers for peace on both sides of the Atlantic and both sides of the peace line. All friends of Ireland and Northern Ireland know the task of making the peace endure will be difficult. The path of peace is never easy, but the parties have made brave decisions. They have chosen hope over hate, the promise of the future over the poison of the past. And in so doing, already they have written a new chapter in the rich history of their island, a chapter of resolute courage that inspires us all. In the days to come, there may be those who will try to undermine this great achievement, not only with words, but perhaps also with violence. All the parties and all the rest of us must stand shoulder to shoulder to defy any such appeals. On this Good Friday, we give thanks for the work of Prime Minister Ahern and Prime Minister Blair, truly remarkable leaders who did an unbelievable job in these talks. We give thanks for the work of Senator George Mitchell, who was brilliant and unbelievably patient and long-suffering. We give thanks especially to the leaders of the parties, for they had to make the courageous decisions. We also thank Prime Minister Blair and Prime Minister Ahern's predecessors for starting and nurturing the process of peace.
On this date, April 10th, 1998, 25 years ago, then President Bill Clinton at the White House announcing the Good Friday Agreement. He referenced George Mitchell. That was the first ever U.S. Special Envoy for Northern Ireland who brokered the deal. He's also a former U.S. Senate Majority Leader, Democrat from Maine. The current U.S. Special Envoy for Northern Ireland is Joe Kennedy III, former Democratic congressman from Massachusetts. Again, President Biden will leave for Ireland tomorrow, and former President Bill Clinton will also be heading off next week and taking part in a Queen's University in Belfast conference on the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Accords. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word to get the stories Washington is talking about sent to your inbox every day. Subscribe at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.